Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the launch event for Make My Money Matter. My name's Gillian Tett. I'm with the Financial Times, and I have a terrific group of people who I'll introduce in just a second, who are going to be talking about this very interesting and exciting new initiative. Now, the fact I'm talking to you all from a screen shows that we live in a completely new world where we've been forced to rethink many of the assumptions that have underpinned our life in recent years, and finance and business is no exception. During the last couple of years, there has been a rising campaign to try and create a more meaningful sense of purpose for finance and business. We've been writing about that for the last year at the Financial Times with an initiative called Moral Money. And what we've seen in the last couple of months is that as a result of COVID and the Black Lives Matter protest, these issues are actually becoming more, not less important. Now, what's interesting is that up until now, it's been primarily wholesale finance. It's been primarily the banks and the pension companies, the industry that's been pushing these important shifts in focus. But today, the important issue that is going to be discussed right now is the degree to which ordinary people, ordinary savers and pensioners can get involved as well. Because what Richard Curtis, with a large group of partners, is doing is trying to launch a new campaign to make my money matter, or make your money matter, in the sense of trying to mobilize pensions and savings to try and support sustainable finance. So we have an absolutely terrific group of people to talk about that today. Richard Curtis, I think, is known to many of you, doesn't need much in the way of introduction. So he's going to say a few words at the beginning, followed by Mark Carney, again, someone who needs absolutely no introduction. Then the CEO of Nest, Helen Dean, the CEO of WWF, World Wildlife Fund, and the chair of the Board of Pension Scheme, Russell Picot from HSBC, will be talking as well. And then we have a few other comments from our partners and we'll open it up to questions. But I'd like to start by handing the floor to Richard to explain why he's doing this now, why it matters, and what he thinks should be happening in the coming months to try and support this initiative. Richard.
Gillian, thank you very much indeed. And thank you very much to everyone listening in, and all the speakers and all the supporters of the campaign. I mean, I do have to say, it's still a surprise to me that I'm involved in it. A year ago, I didn't know my pension was even invested, but I found that it is such a big and interesting issue. I mean, there you've got this 3.1 trillion UK pension pot, and where it's invested and the businesses it supports and its power actually to do good, particularly now, is such a gripping subject. And it's also, if you do move your pension, if you do ask your pensioner to actually, your pension provider, to put your money into a sustainable and ethical fund, then the statistics say that it's actually 27 times more effective than giving up flying and eating meat would be. So it has become something that I've become increasingly interested in. And also, I do think, as you say, this is the perfect time to be launching this campaign because, well, first, it's a 5-year anniversary of the SDGs. And I've spent my whole life trying to work out how, as it were, you can find the money to do the right thing. And I used to think that it was charity, and then we did the Make Poverty History campaign and really focused on government spending. But it's becoming really clear that business and investment, with all the jobs and all the money and all the consumers and all the employees, they're the ones who are absolutely key to making things happen. So it's a sort of key part of funding the SDGs. It's also, I think, a big generational thing. People are now really asking, what can they do in their own lives? You see it, I mean, particularly with the younger generation, but we've all, as it were, stopped buying plastic bottles. We're looking at the sourcing of the clothes we wear. We're looking at the way we travel. We're looking at the food that we eat. And now I think the thing to do is to look at our financial footprint, to, as it were, look what's happening to our money while our money is waiting for us in a pension to collect it. And then the third thing, which I think is important, is the acceleration to all this that COVID has brought. People are really hoping that, as it were, we don't go to, as it were, 5 retrospective years. But in fact, this is used as a kickoff to building back better. You know, what can you actually do to change things? And you can really see in the explosion of the Me Too and the Black Lives Matter movement that people are in the mood to change their own behaviors in order to change the world. Now, I'm not underestimating, and Mark will be fully estimating, the extent to which there are big issues here to do with the law, with governance, with fiduciary duty, with regulation. But it actually starts, I think, with a very personal thing. Where's my money going? Can I make it matter? And my big breakthrough on this issue was when I happened upon a TED talk by Dr. Bronwyn King. And she was an oncologist. She'd spent a whole life trying to save people from cancer. And then she had her first meeting with a financial advisor, and she found out that her pension, 3 of the big things that her pension was in, was tobacco companies. So it's just that shock of finding out that, as it were, where your pension is, if it's in the wrong default fund, that it will actually be supporting things that you deeply disapprove of. But the exciting bit then for me has been this journey into all the positive things that we could be with our money, supporting clean and renewable energy. You could be supporting affordable healthcare. You could be supporting development of vaccines, affordable homes, building of schools, building of infrastructure. You know, there are so many positive things. So it's not a negative thing, it's a positive thing. Here's a big pot of money. What stands in the way of it having maximum potency? Now, one of the things is public awareness. So that's what we're in many ways here for. And all the statistics say that when asked, people would like their money to be in sustainable and ethical funds. 68% of UK savers want that considered. Half of pension savers really think that responsible investment should actually be built into their default fund. So, as it were, it's a question of asking the public to ask the questions. Now, the next sort of stumbling block when I was thinking about this is I thought, all sounds very good, but am I going to lose money? Because the last thing people want to do is have a pension which diminishes in its value. But worse than that would be to have a pension which you collect in a world on fire, as it were. And the really reassuring thing is that it's not a question of, as it were, profit versus ethics. Because over the last 10 years, responsible ESG funds have actually been performing consistently better. I remember someone from BlackRock saying the why not moment has arrived. And during the COVID crisis, we've seen, I think, 70 billion of assets move into ethical funds, while 200 billion have actually flown out of the more unethical things. So the question is, what can you do? Because this is a sort of public action campaign to start with. And we're just saying to people, you know, ask the questions. Get in touch with if you've got a financial advisor, but much more likely, get in touch with your pension, say, where's my money? Is it actually in an ethical? Is it in an environmentally consistent fund? And for most people, it'll also be a question of actually talking to people who know all about this in the company or the union that they belong to. Actually go to your place of work and say, where's our money? And I think it will be a really popular thing for employees and a really popular thing for employers if they say that they're going to look at it, they say they're going to move, so that you actually aren't investing in fuel and arms and cigarettes and gambling and deforestation and companies that support child labor and don't take into account, gender and diversity. But actually, you could be investing in the very best companies that are changing quickest or doing the very best things. So you get a pension that you can be proud of. And in actually creating a public demand for this, I think that what happens is that you will get a massive change in the way that pension funds look at what pensioners actually want. And this sort of, trickles upwards towards making sure that all the real complexities that there are here to do with fiduciary responsibilities and all of that move quicker. I actually remember speaking to Mark about this and saying, should we wait? Should we wait? Should we wait till all the evaluation systems are in place, till the law is in place? And he really said to me, no, if you wait, you'll wait forever. The more people who ask what their pension's supporting, the more easily accessible information will become. The more people who ask what their pension's doing, the more products will be developed, the more successful those pension companies that have the best products will be. the more attention that there is paid to this, the more trustees of pension funds will do, and the more trustees and pension funds that are really wanting change, the more the government will press forward with that change. So, I think that it's kicking off with the public, talking all the time to the pension funds, talking to the government, and seeing whether we can really shift that 3.1 trillion in the UK to a supporting the very best of business in the future. And I'm sure Mark will talk a lot about the incredible importance of the environmental side of that, but it's also to do with all the things that we believe in. So we've launched this campaign, and what we're finding is that an enormous number of people are thinking about it. So all sorts of organizations have signed up: BNP Paribas, Oxfam, Triodos Bank, World Wildlife Fund, Comet Relief, Exotricity. And then we're talking to all the people who've been working on all these advocacy efforts for a long time: Share Action, Impact Investing Institute, World Wildlife Fund, Green Finance Institute, Business in the Community, Accounting for Sustainability. So I think that, I think this door is open, and what we're trying to do is really push it open. So you get straight back to the issue of where is my money going? And it's a gripping thing to talk about. I never dreamt it would be, but I've had lunch with lots of friends of mine who actually during the course of the lunch make a phone call to try and find out where their pension is. And particularly young people, who are now compelled to have a pension when they start work, they are not going to want to have a default pension, which they don't trust. They're actually going to want something where they can be completely sure that their financial footprint is a good one. So we're looking for financial footprint to actually go alongside carbon footprint as a way to really change the way that companies treat their employees, supply chains, and particularly, a progressive and responsible attitude to the environment and biodiversity. I think that COVID has proved to us that big things can happen. When you see coronavirus sweeping through New York, suddenly the possibility that you will get to a point with climate change where major cities like New York are flooding becomes much more likely. And yet, in the face of those epic things, we don't have to be powerless. It's our money. And actually, if we increase investment in the companies that are doing the best thing, this is a huge way of having your own bit of power over the way that the world is going. And I think that it's the moment to act decisively and act fast. As the Doors would say, the time for hesitation is through, and it really is possible. And the public will make it so much more possible if they're curious and insistent to have a pension to be proud of that'll make your money matter.
Well, thank you, Rich. That's great. That's an incredibly impressive cast of characters you mentioned. I guess the one question is, when are you going to make a movie about it? And will Julia Roberts will be in it? And who will play Mark Carney if there is a movie about the pension fight?
Well, wait a minute. You say this, but there is an element that we are in an Erin Brockovich situation. You actually are in a situation where people do not know what a company is doing, and the public aren't aware of what's being done to them. So we'll have to see whether Julia plays the goodie or the baddie. As we know, Brad Pitt's aching to play Mark Carney. But, movies take a long time, and I want this to happen fast.
Well, maybe we can have Hugh Grant play Mark Carney. But in the meantime,
Hugh's definitely the baddie. Hugh's the baddie.
In the meantime, we have the real Mark Carney. Mark, tell us why you care about this, because you've been in mainstream finance for a long time. You're now the UN Special Envoy on climate change and finance. How does this all fit into what you're doing now?
Yeah, well, thank you, Gillian, and thank you, Richard, for this initiative, and everyone who's watching for getting behind it. Look, I came back to the UK about 7 years ago, almost to the day, in part, maybe with a bit of understatement, because finance had lost its way during the financial crisis and the run-up to that. And there were a number of people, certainly up and down the country, who wanted it sorted, but within the industry, within the government, and wanted finance to go back to what it's best at, which is providing solutions, to giving, helping to finance what society wants. That's ultimately finance's role. It's not an end in itself. It's a means to an end. It serves society. And it's one of the things that United Kingdom is particularly good at over the centuries. UK is very, very good at finance and very good at financial innovation. And when it gets behind what society wants and when it's aligned, it can do extraordinary things. Now, one of the objectives of the United Kingdom, it's clarion clear, whether it's in surveys or in voting patterns or in legislation, it's actually the law of the land, is this transition to net zero. So I'm going to focus on the climate component of this. Richard rightly points out that this agenda is a broader agenda, but I'm going to focus on the climate element given my role. And so the UK is the leader, really, in many respects, amongst 125 countries who are looking to transition to net zero, because that's what it will take to stabilize the climate. Now, we have to do it right, and we have to do it soon. And finance will play an exceptionally important role in that, a decisive role in many respects in that. Now, you throw into the situation that we've all been living through, which has a couple of implications. One is for business, just to speak coldly in terms of financial terms, there is a strategic reset for business. There's been an acceleration, as you know, Gillian, you've been covering this in your role at the FT, but an acceleration of a series of trends around digital and e-everything that has implications for business. There is a lot more debt in our companies and countries. Consumers have been shaken, understandably, not just for health concerns, but also concerns about employment. And all of that means that companies are going to need to adjust their strategies. Well, adjust, if not change their strategies. Now, they're changing their strategies at a time when it is decisive for achieving that overarching goal of society to move towards net zero. And at a time when there is a big societal reset. People have stepped back and said, what do we want? So ignorance is not an excuse in terms of company strategies or finance's role in funding the types of initiatives that would be consistent with addressing climate change and having sustainable growth. So you bring those together, and actually it brings together a huge commercial opportunity. This is not, it is a risk if we wait, close our eyes, don't act, but it is an enormous opportunity if we do act. And I want to, you can see I've decided to be upbeat now that I'm liberated from the dour central banking. But one of the things I do want to point out is that this campaign, this initiative, it's pushing on a door that is at least ajar. It's if not open. Finance has been moving in this direction. You've been covering it over the course of the last couple of years. Increased focus on it. It's easy to throw around big numbers in finance. I'm going to give you a very big number, which is $140 trillion. So let's say 110, 115 trillion pounds of finance, a balance sheet around the world that wants information from companies to tell us what is that company's carbon footprint and what is it going to do about it? Who's managing it? How's it going to get it down? What metrics the pension funds or the asset managers or the bank should look at in order to determine it? And that's the information they want. Now, the question I think that one of the questions that Richard and the Make My Money Matter campaign is putting on the table is, okay, but how do the rest of us judge whether our money is being invested in a way that's consistent with our objectives? So finance is pulling out all this complicated information, and it needs to turn around, it needs to manage that consistent with people's objectives, but it also needs to communicate that to people in a way that's digestible, understandable, so I can compare one pension fund to another, or my ISA, if I'm investing an ISA in a way that, this is much broader than pension. This focuses on pension, but it's broader. And one of the things we're doing, and don't worry, I'm coming to a conclusion because I want to hear from everyone else, but one of the things we're doing in preparation for the Glasgow COP in 2021, November 2021, is to work with the industry to figure out ways so that they can communicate, they can answer this question. If there's this groundswell, make my money matter, how is it invested? It's not just answering specific companies, but is the totality of the investment, if it's my pension fund or my ISA, is it being invested in a way that's going to solve the problem, that's going to move the economy towards net zero? And that isn't a simple box tick, a simple index. It needs to show companies, the people who invest our money need to know which companies in the energy sector, in the tech sector, in the financial sector are managing themselves towards net zero, because that's what we need to stabilize the climate, and they need to communicate that to us. So we don't need simple brown, green, we need 50 shades of green, and we need a way to communicate exactly where things are headed. I think that this campaign, this focus, last word, is exactly the catalyst that the financial sector needs to help open that door all the way. Because, as I say, they're demanding this information from companies. Companies are increasingly doing this, and companies from the tech sector to the energy sector are actually standing up and saying, we're going to transition to net zero as a consequence. But people up and down the country don't know that, and they don't know who's on the right and the wrong side of history, because we don't have all this information. It's not being communicated, and therefore the pension money is not necessarily being invested in a way that's consistent with people's values. And of course, I just spoke about climate. I will reiterate what Richard said, is the values extend beyond that, and there's other questions that need to be answered as well. Thanks.
Right. So in a way, what you're saying is, in the same way that, say, the food industry, people began to really change their behavior towards food when they began to understand what was happening inside the food supply chain. But if there's more transparency and people can actually see what's happening to their money, that may force a change of behavior or actually accelerate it.
That's exactly right, Gillian. And I think the other thing that and it bears repeating, is that as people move their money or change their money or express their preferences around their money, that funds new companies or new solutions that, whether it's in the food industry or the energy industry, that are consistent with what people want. That's what creates the innovation, and that's what creates the jobs of the future and the growth of the future.
Right. Well, that sounds very encouraging. Let's hear from some of the practitioners. Helen, you're running a company called Nest. Tell us very briefly what Nest does and why it matters, and what you make of this campaign. Helen, I think you're actually on mute. I think you're still on mute. Maybe we will, in that case.
Am I still on mute, or have I unmuted?
Yep, you're good. We can hear you now. So tell us, Helen.
Great.
Tanya, come after that.
Thank you, Gillian. Nest is a not-for-profit pension trust. We've got more than 9 million members, so we're very big. About a quarter of the UK workforce have a Nest account. We're currently investing £10 billion on behalf of our members, but we're growing very rapidly. So this time next year, we expect to be investing 15 billion, and by the end of the decade, we should be investing around 100 billion. We exist to improve the retirements of our many millions of members, and we simply cannot do that if we ignore the world that they will be retiring into. We're long-term investors, and we need the industries and the companies that we invest in to thrive over the long term and to be sustainable. And we also fundamentally believe that well-run companies with sound environmental and social practices are just much more likely to be profitable and successful over the long term. We also want our members to have trust and confidence in Nest. We want them to be proud of the way that we're investing their hard-earned cash. And we know that they really care about society and the environment. So we've done surveys of our members, and 3/4 of them tell us that it really matters to them that Nest invests their money responsibly. Some of them say that irrespective of returns, but for many of them, it's actually that they've understood quite rightly that responsible investment is a great way to achieve risk-adjusted returns over the longer term. So that's why a responsible investment approach is right at the heart of our default strategy. I'm not talking about our ethical fund, I'm talking about our default strategy where 98% of our members are invested. So as shareholders, we use our voting power. We're very active. And we look at things like fair executive pay, we look at things like the living wage, we look at things like diversity on boards, and we really try and use our influence to make a difference there. We set ourselves a target of going tobacco-free last year, and we said we'd do it within 2 years. We'll actually have achieved that in the next 2 months, which is a full year earlier than we'd anticipated. But we also have a real focus on climate change, and that's because it's our view, it's our job to take a long-term view on behalf of our members. And things like rising taxes, carbon taxes, and falling consumer demand just mean that fossil fuels are not going to be a good long-term investment. Being a heavy polluter might not be affecting a company's profits now, but it certainly will in the future. So as a long-term investor, we've designed a climate aware fund, which is designed to drive more money into green technology and sustainable energy at the expense of greenhouse gas and carbon emitters. We set that fund up in 2017, so 3 years ago, and in that time we've moved over £200 million away from companies that are polluters into companies that are really tackling the challenges of a low carbon economy. So if you look at that in terms of equivalence, that's the equivalent of taking 44,000 cars off the road. We've also invested more than £100 million in renewable energy sites as well. We're also now starting to see some results from the pressure that we're putting on some of the bigger companies with other like-minded pension providers. We're starting to put pressure on some of the biggest companies in the world. So for example, some pressure on Barclays recently meant that they moved to a zero carbon target. And I think that's a great example and illustration of just how powerful pension providers can be. But there's so much more to do. I mean, we're really proud of what we've done so far, but we are a young company. We're only 10 years old. We'll be 10 years old this Sunday. And as we grow over the coming years, we intend to really challenge ourselves to do a lot more and to go a lot further. We need to use our growing investor power and influence to really benefit our members. But I think the thing is that although companies like Nest and HSBC and others who are really doing great things, we can all do a lot on our own. The real prize is collective action. If pension companies work together to influence real change, just imagine what we could achieve. Auto-enrollment means that the vast majority of UK workers now have a pension, more than 18 million people. And pension funds are investing more than 3 trillion, as Richard said, on behalf of those workers. That's a huge amount of money, and that huge amount of money means that we can have enormous influence over the companies we invest in, potential to be a massive force for good. I think the thing is, more and more people in the country really do want to make a difference, but they don't realise the difference that they can make through their pension. So more than half of our members have told us that in the past year they've changed their behaviour in some way. They gave up eating meat, they stopped flying, they started to use public transport. They did something because they care about society and the environment. But only 5% of them have actually done anything active with their pensions and investments. People just don't understand the power of the pension. As Richard said, having a sustainable pension can be much more impactful than many of the other things that people might not actually just decide to do. So the thing is, I fundamentally think that once workers really understand the difference that they can make through their pensions, they will increasingly insist that their pension providers step up to the mark. And that's why we at Nest are so keen to support the ambition of this campaign, because we need to get people engaged, and we need to get to the place where, as a country, our citizens are proud of the way their pensions are invested.
Well, thank you, Helen. That's fascinating. I must say, I find that 27 times ratio that Richard mentioned, you just cited as well, absolutely fascinating and very thought-provoking. I mean, Tanya, you are running a charity which has traditionally essentially been passing around the hat and asking individuals and companies to make donations. I think you're on mute, Tanya, actually. I think, yeah, great. And I'm curious, would you agree that actually in some ways it's more meaningful today to be asking people to think about their pensions than putting pennies in a charity box?
Absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt one of the things we're very struck by as an organisation with such a large supporter base. We're lucky to have nearly 1 million supporters in the UK. And when anybody reads an article, when they watch some content, very often supporters will come with a question of, well, what can I do? And I think we know many of the interventions, whether this is switching to a renewable energy tariff, whether this is changing our diets, whether this is using EV transportation or walking or cycling. There are lots of very important and specific steps we can take as consumers, but this is a really significant step. When we look at the maths sitting in and around it, this could be the single most important thing that any consumer could do in terms of influencing their company and indeed their pension provider, because everyone's saving really hard effectively for their retirement or for a rainy day in the future. But realistically, unless this investment is being directed into the right kind of future, they could be facing, you know, a set of very, very uncertain consequences. So the 27 times multiplier figure we think is huge, but we do think is very closely bound in facts and science. And as a science-led organisation, for us, this is really critical. I mean, the reason why we very much stepped in and we're really delighted to join this campaign is, as an organisation, this is of course close to our mission. If we hope to tackle climate change, restore the natural world, and effectively play our part in building a better world and a better future, unless we change what we invest in and how we invest, then effectively we're not going to deliver that force multiplier. Pensions are a critical part of this, there's no doubt. The reason we're all on Zoom, Gillian, you've very eloquently reminded us, this has been a huge global shock. It's almost like economically we've had a heart attack. But equally, it is important that this doesn't move to a loss of focus in terms of some of the additional critical actions that need to be taken. We must focus on people's health, we must focus on the economy, but we also must focus on some of the longer term futures that we know are potentially underway. If anything, this has underlined the need that we do need decisive leadership on this. We often call for it at head of state level, but actually I think today we're also calling for it at institutional level in terms of financial institutions and indeed businesses and indeed the opportunity for consumers as well. The facts stack up completely. We know that these are long-term systemic risks as reported by the World Economic Forum and many, many others. We are very dependent on a healthy environment and natural world, and unless pension investment, unless major trillion-dollar investments are focused in that direction, we absolutely will fail. So I guess as we start to look to the future, I think we would say as WWF that there is no doubt that the financial sector and leaders in the financial sectors probably have a disproportionate impact in terms of how this story would end. And we would really ask the financial sector to play its part, both in the transparency and the enablement of this funding shift for the future as well. So, like many others, we're of course calling for Paris Agreement alignment to hit net zero and get us onto a 1.5 degree pathway. I guess also in pragmatic terms, in terms of what are we as an organisation doing about our own pension and our own investments. And we're a great believer that we certainly shouldn't look to hold others by a different standard. And as you can imagine, WWF employees, this is absolutely front and centre for them in terms of their precious funds and resources that they hope to put aside for the future, how they will be invested. We moved our investment, our pension fund in 2013. It's now with an organisation called the Lion Trust Sustainable Future Managed Fund. That is very much focused on a strong long-term return. And as you can imagine, there are no investments in fossil fuels or anything that is damaging to the environment or indeed has social damage as well. We see this as a very positive step for us as an organisation, but it has also ensured that we are very close as an institution to the issues that we very often advocate on and indeed ask others to act on for the future. So for us, this is a critical issue, but it's also a critical and a practical opportunity for financial leaders, for businesses, but also for consumers as well, to think about their very significant impact on the future too. I'll stop there.
Well, thank you, Tanya. That's great. Well, I guess, you know, if you want to save the seals and the rest of the planet, think about your stocks. That's not been a slogan we've heard a lot before. But I'd like to bring in Russell now, Russell Picot, who runs the HSBC Pension Fund or Board of Trustees. People like you, Russell, are not usually seen as placard-waving activists. You're not the kind of people who normally chain yourself to bulldozers. How and why are you involved in this?
So thanks very much for the invitation today, Gillian, and it's been great to participate. So just a couple of words about the fund I chair. HSBC Bank UK Pension Scheme is probably the largest single employer UK DC scheme. With the DB assets, we're investing over 30 billion on behalf of 190,000 members. And we take our fiduciary responsibilities very seriously, and it's very clear that we have many young members who will be investing in the markets for 30 or 40 years. And one of the things which will drive the amount of the pension that they will get are very long-term factors. So climate change risk, for example, is very clear to us. It is a financial risk. It is an investment risk present probably in all the assets that we invest in, and that we as trustees carry responsibility on behalf of our members to do something about it. We absolutely recognise the duty to manage that risk. So 5 years ago, we created a fund, the Future World Fund Legal and General, that now is our DC default fund. It's a fund which is very broadly invested, but it increases its holdings of companies with green revenues and green infrastructure. It has no pure coal investments, and it decreases the holdings of high emitters. But there's a very important other element to that, and a lot of the previous speakers have spoken about this. Direct financial investment is one way of influencing. Collaboration and putting pressure on the system is really, really important. And LGIM on our behalf monitor 80 to 90 of the world's largest companies in 6 of the most critical sectors around climate change. And they write a letter to the chair of the board saying very nicely, dear board chair, we're going to assess your company for your preparedness to a 2-degree transition. And then every year they name and shame the best companies and the worst companies across those 6 sectors, and they publicly divest from the worst companies. So recently they have divested 11 companies in aggregate, and that has got a lot of attention. And I can personally attest that one particular board chair, when he got the letter, he took it really seriously. Board chairs don't want an investor like Legal and General turning up at the annual general meeting and voting against their reappointment. So it's part of this building pressure through the system. Very much agree with what Helen said. It's really, really important to build collaboration with other investors. One of the things that we feel very strongly on my trustee board, although we can take certain steps within our own power to do something about the risks and to improve the risk-adjusted return, the reality right now is that the world is heading towards somewhere between 3 to 4 degrees of global warming. Through a purely financial lens, that is not going to yield good investment returns for my members, let alone providing a world that they will want to live in. We, acting in isolation, can't influence that. By acting in collaboration with other like-minded investors, we can put pressure on the system to change. And I think that's where this campaign comes in. Many of you know I was involved right at the outset with the TCFD, which Mark established 4 years ago. Part of that is a very important concept, the investment chain. If members of pension schemes ask their trustees, what are you doing about this? And are you taking action around, for example, climate change or some of these other long-term environmental factors such as biodiversity loss? The trustees will feel under pressure and they'll need information. So they'll ask the fund managers for the information, and the fund managers in turn will seek information from the companies and put pressure on the company. And that is how the system needs to function. It's the response which we need in order to actually get better outcomes and a safer world for everyone. Thank you.
So it looks like Gillian has unfortunately dropped off the line. Which that is a situation we hadn't planned for. So I guess we can take it on to, well, next part of the event was going to be speaking to some partners who have signed up recently to the initiative. So shall I hand over to Richard Ingle first to speak, and then we'll have Penny after that.
Hi everyone, thank you and good afternoon. I'm Richard Ingle, Chief Financial Officer at Trustee Bank UK. As one of the world's leading sustainable banks, Trustee Bank believes in making money work for positive change. We've been offering ethical banking for 40 years across Europe and 25 years here in the UK. Right now, values-based finances have never felt more relevant, and that's why we're proud to be a founding pledge partner for Make My Money Matter. It's important to us that our pension scheme reflects and supports what our organisation works for and believes in. That is, using money for social, environmental and cultural good. And we've been proud for many years to offer our co-workers an ethically run pension fund by default. However, we continue to try and improve on that. When you compare the best providers of workplace group pension plans, there is unfortunately not enough to differentiate them on their commitment to sustainability or positive impact. With that in mind, working with our pension provider, we are conducting a feasibility review for moving the scheme to an even more flexible pension platform that will specifically allow Trustee funds, which are managed by Trustee Investment Management, and some of the highest impact funds available within our Trustee Bank UK scheme.
Hello everyone, I'm back, and apologies for that. As I say, we've all had to learn how to be very flexible and responsive and innovative in the face of these new challenges. Who has not yet spoken amongst the partners? Marie, have you?
I think it was me next, Penny.
Penny, yes, Penny, you go ahead and then Anne-Marie.
Great, thanks very much. And thanks for the invitation to join today's launch. And I'm speaking as the head of the private sector team at Oxfam GB, and on behalf of the CEO, Danny Swiss-Candarada, who wasn't able to be here today. So Oxfam GB is delighted to have joined Make My Money Matter as a pledge partner, because we understand that influencing pension investments is really important, given the power and potential of the finance sector to create a more socially and environmentally sustainable world. Oxfam's taken a number of steps in the last few years to engage with our employees and ensure that, as well as meeting their personal needs, their pensions are aligned with our organisational values and mission. So in a staff survey about 3 years ago, over 3/4 of Oxfam staff stated that having their pension invested ethically was either very important or important to them. And they also said that they expected Oxfam to offer an ethical pension as the default option, rather than then having to opt into a more ethical pension, which was the case at the time. So since 2018, Oxfam has offered an ethically screened default pension to all new employees. And we've also been working with Oxfam's pension advisors and our pension provider, Aviva, to deliver various staff talks and other communication materials to help raise awareness and encourage all employees to review and consider the right options for their investments. So we recognise we've still got more that we need to do, and we're really excited to join with other pledge partners who are on a similar journey and to explore how we can jointly leverage our influence in support of a more sustainable finance sector. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Penny. Anne-Marie, you're from BNP Paribas. Why are you involved in this?
Well, good afternoon to all, and really delighted to not only be participating this afternoon, but indeed to make the pledge in the UK for Making My Money Matter on behalf of our 9,000 UK employees. BNP Paribas has long understood how the financial sector has a critical role and can play a critical role to accelerate our path to a better, to a more sustainable future. And indeed, this shapes our company purpose. Our strategies are very much aligned with supporting the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, to which Richard made reference earlier. Our global policies, for example, express our commitment to ensuring that not only do we serve our clients, but also the society in which we live. Earlier this year, for example, we strengthened our world-leading coal exit strategy to encompass all OECD countries by the end of 2030. So I want to congratulate Richard, Tony, and their teams for their incredible hard work in driving this mission so as to push the huge UK pension pot towards powering the drive towards a better world. And I'm delighted today to pledge the BNP Paribas UK pension plan to be part of this campaign. Thank you for having us.
That's wonderful, thank you. Well, we've had a lot of very inspiring thoughts about this whole initiative, and I'm going to turn in a few moments to the audience to ask questions about, you know, how and why this is going to work. We have a number of media on the line. You can ask questions either by sending a message to the Q&A function, or if I can work out the technology, I believe you can also raise your hand and ask questions directly. But before I do that, just before you're gathering your thoughts, I'd like to ask to any of you, the legal framework around pensions is extremely complicated and varies enormously between the UK, the US, and continental Europe. Is it legal for company pension trustees to say, I want to go sustainable? Is it legal for, you know, employees to say to their own companies, I want to do this? Or are there specific technical issues that need to be addressed as well? Who would like to jump in? Anyone feeling ready to embrace the law? Russell.
Yeah, thanks, Gillian. I guess Helen's going to review on that as well, because she's gone down the same path. Yeah, this question of fiduciary duties is often thrown up, I think, as a barrier, Gillian, and that's not something that we see. I mean, it's clear as a trustee of a pension fund, you can't simply invest willy-nilly. There needs to be typically a financial reason for you to make these investments, but you are allowed to take into account ESG factors, and actually, if you're a little bit agile and nimble about this, it's not very difficult to make a financial case for many of the things that we've talked about. Obviously, climate change risk is one of the things we've talked about. It's a direct financial risk, and therefore you have to actually think about that. But there are other factors, for example, some of the social factors, many of the ESG factors, which clearly there is strong evidence that these are financial risks as well as being ethical or moral questions. So I have to say, I've never found this a barrier to actually doing the right thing on behalf of my members with good advice. I think there's a growing body of UK pension schemes who are actually managing to go down this route. So I know you will hear this as a reason for inaction. My own view is that that's not well founded, actually.
Well, must actually about the FT, we actually have some people from the legal side writing in and saying we're not sure whether this is legal, and there's obviously some debate here, but obviously it is being addressed. Helen or Rob, do you have any views on this? Or
yes, yes, certainly do, and I certainly do agree with Russell. The fiduciary problem that people talk about has at its root a myth that there's a trade-off between returns and investing along with your values. The way that we look at this is we are a long-term investor. We are investing in companies that have to thrive over the long term, have to be sustainable over the long term, and have to be profitable over the long term, or we simply will not achieve the returns that we need to achieve for our members. As Russell said, the risks associated with things like tobacco and poor environmental stocks mean that those things need to be factored in. So we don't see this as an issue at all, because we hold very clearly in our mind that as a fiduciary, we are investing in a way that will achieve the best risk-adjusted long-term returns for our members, and doing that aligns entirely with responsible investment. So I think we need to get rid of this myth that there's a choice to make here. You can actually have both. There's a win-win.
Yeah, I'll just jump in. I think we should distinguish two things, and the first is a basic point, which is around accurate information and comprehensive information to pension holders about how a pension is invested. And that's the first requirement. And I think people are, well, may or may not be aware, but of legislation that has been put in place in order to require pension trustees to state what their approach is to engagement, how they take into account material, ESG, and other factors. We have 2 pension trustees on the webinar, and I'm sure they discharged that. But that's being buttressed. There's actually legislation currently making its way through Parliament, which includes provisions. This is not law, but this under discussion about TCFD disclosure, potentially implied temperature rise in the funds, and so there'd be disclosure around that. So if people are interested, if they think this is the type of information they would like to have from their pension funds, I suggest use your vote or your influence accordingly with your elected representatives, and also the extent to which the pension plan takes into account non-financial considerations. Now, that's information, and that's what the pension fund does. Then there is the judgment, which the trustees make about material information, investment risk, and investment opportunity. We'll leave it to specific pensions to make those determinations. The weight of evidence, and you only have to read some of the headlines on the FT site today in terms of some of the write-downs in certain sectors, is that there is material investment risk associated with the transition and material opportunity. I'm going to quote Larry Fink, who's not managing a pension, but climate risk is investment risk, full stop. That's the world's largest asset manager. And a last point, just to kind of pound the point home, 9 of 10 of the world's largest asset managers, 25 top banks in the world, because they have that view, want TCFD disclosure, want this climate-related disclosure. And we're not going to give it to the people on up and down the country whose pension money it is. I mean, it doesn't make sense, and manage around it. So people can use that information, last point, as pension managers. They may not use it properly. They may make errors in terms of their investments, or they may take advantage of it, but it seems odd to not be used to use one of the most important valuation lenses available today, particularly if members want it.
I think that's a great point. And I must say, having covered the financial crisis back in 2008, I think the day that someone invented the word shadow bank, that changed everything, because you had a way of explaining a very complex topic. The day that someone invented the term stranded asset to explain how climate change exposed assets could end up losing their value, I think has probably done a lot to galvanize attention in the financial industry on these issues. But we have a lot of fantastic questions coming in. So I'm actually going to turn to the questions now, unless any of you on the panel want to talk about the legality issues. And I want to start with a question from Adam Shaw, who is a presenter of BBC Radio 4 Moneybox Live. Great question. Given the financial pressure people have faced during COVID, people will be mainly concerned with returns, not ethical issues. Is that going to create a stumbling block to this whole campaign? Anyone want to talk about the fact that everyone's terrified of the future right now and just desperate to preserve their money and may not have the energy or space to start nitpicking on the details of how their pension's structured? Richard, do you want to say anything about that?
Well, I'm sure someone will have a more sophisticated answer than me, but what is consistently being proved, and what we just said, is that actually during the crisis, people have moved into ethical things because they think that's where they'll make the most money. Actually, this is an area, there's no doubt that consumer choices are going to head towards ethical businesses and disengagement from unethical businesses. So in fact, I think if people are worrying about their money, the thing to do is to push for a sustainable and ethical investment as a way of absolutely ensuring that they get what they want when eventually they retire. So, I mean, I think it is an odd time, but the point is that you've got to raise these issues. You've got to be in the argument and in the discussion, because if we wait and wait and wait, then we won't build back better. We'll build back the same. I love that heart attack image. You know, the one thing you don't do after a heart attack is continue to behave in exactly the same way that you behaved before the heart attack. It's actually the moment to change things rather than a moment to say, well, I will go back to what I was doing before. But there may be a more technical answer to that.
Anybody else got any thoughts on this point about whether you're seeing the consumers saying we just don't have the time to cope with that? Helen, it looks like you're about to say something.
Yes, yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, again, I think it's a false choice. People who are concerned about their money and who want to and are concerned about the future need to think about sustainable and responsible investment. So I think it's a false choice. But the point I was really going to make was we've just been talking to our member community about this as it happens. And I'm just sitting here with a bunch of material that's come back from them and looking at a whole bunch of verbatim quotes from people which are calling on us as a pension provider to be responsible specifically in the wake of what's happened with COVID. You know, people are saying we need to sort our society out, we need to sort our economy out, and we need to sort the environment out, because they are some of the factors that have caused this problem in the first place and have made it so difficult to deal with. So for us, there is a quite overwhelming sense of our membership being behind responsible investment as a response to COVID.
Right, I've got a great question from Mark Carney, but before I do move to that, Russell and Marie, do you have any views in terms of your roles actually, you know, at the cutting edge or the on the front lines of managing pension money?
Well, I think it doesn't happen without understanding indeed what needs to drive us. You know, very simply said, what's the point of having a pension if there isn't going to be a world worth living in? So when you really, as has been mentioned before, drill down into how can we make a difference, then it becomes clear that we need to be quick, we need to have weight behind it. And what is really great now is that so much is converging. Sustainability, diversity and inclusion, it's all now part of what our clients want, of what our employees want. So I agree with previous speakers, it's no longer a choice, it's a must. Otherwise, we will simply ourselves as organizations not be sustainable.
Right.
Shirley, if I can just say a couple of words. So, I mean, my sense is that what the coronavirus crisis has shown is the S of ESG is really important, increasingly important. So the social aspects of our society. Also, I think there is increasing numbers of conversations in the asset owner community that I inhabit, that the system previously was optimized for efficiency and not for resilience. And these are really important questions. And obviously pensions are very long-term investment, but now is the time for views to be expressed around those really important topics, because I think there is an increasing trend within the asset owner community to engage much more broadly on these topics to build a better long-term future.
So activist asset managers. I think we might yet see activist accountants as well, which is something we haven't seen in the past. But I'm curious, I've got a great question for you, Mark. With Make Poverty history, we won more government money for aid, but we also shifted company law, so companies had to report on environmental and social impacts. What do we need to do to push the government to do in this campaign? I guess that's also, what do you need to do, Mark, to try and get some change amongst the government infrastructure there?
Well, I think we want a couple of things from the public authorities, let's put it that way. So one is that we want consistent disclosure. So we want to finish off the good work of the FCA that started to have this what's called TCFD disclosure, so climate-related disclosure. I do think we want to have companies and those who invest in them beyond pensions, to include asset managers, other asset owners, insurance companies, many of the most sophisticated investors in the world on this. So for many of them, it'll be very straightforward here in the UK, to report whether they're part of the solution or part of the problem in terms of this transition to net zero. There's various ways to do that, and we're working with them to develop it. But again, to make that a requirement. And this, you know, to be absolutely clear, this is providing information so people can make choices. and informed choices. And I think to go back to the performance question, the evidence is actually falling on one side at the moment, which is outperformance, in part because of better management of resilience. Companies that are managing against these factors or pools of capital have outperformed, including in the run-up and through the crisis. And you have seen much larger flows into these funds than you've seen. Well, actually, Richard referenced some figures at the start, and I would broadly agree with that direction because of it. So we do want. I think when the public demands things and the industry is shifting in a direction, it's the responsibility of the public authorities, the regulators, others, to then regularize this, if you will, in a way that's consistent, comprehensive, and useful for people.
Right. We've got another question for you, Mark, from Terry Slavin, which is, how important is the initiative proposed by Aviva's Steve Waygood, bringing together central banks, finance ministers, and investors to coordinate the mobilization of $1 trillion worth of climate finance over the next 15 years?
Well, it sounds important. I'm not familiar with I know Steve Waygood and I know what $1 trillion is, but I'm not familiar exactly what he has in mind. Look, the scale of this opportunity in the UK, sustainable infrastructure, probably something on the order of 50 to 60 billion a year pounds. Globally, it's 1 to 2 trillion, depending on the objective. I mean, this is a core. I'm going to speak like a financial person. It's an asset class. It's an asset class unto itself. It's not niche. It's mainstream. So, and most of it will be driven by private investment or private decisions, pension funds and others. But what's needed for that is the right information. I'm repeating myself, but also the policy direction out of governments. And it's net zero is the law of the land in the UK. 124 other countries have that objective, and pointing the economy in that direction will make sure that those flows go there. And $1 trillion is, I mean, it's a big number, but relative to what will be put to work in order to achieve it, it's not the biggest number you'll hear around it.
Right. We've got a question from Laura Blows. She points out the pension industry has tried to increase member understanding and engagement unsuccessfully over the years. What does the campaign want the pensions industry to do differently to promote awareness this time around? What's your practical advice? Who would like to either jump in from the campaign side or from the pension side?
Well, I think I mean, again, let me just, from an informal point of view, I would say that it is not something that it's not easy to change. It's not information that's made attractive and advertised as much as it should be. And this is a real opportunity for the pension industry. There's a great new Australian pension campaign called My Future Super, which has really succeeded by going out to the public, going out to young people, talking about ethical and sustainable pensions. So I think that we should see it as an opportunity. And when we did a little test, we found out that people started saying that they would invest more in their pension if they thought that it was doing good. And there are some great local schemes where local authorities' pensions actually invest in local companies. So I think that what it is we are asking the pension companies to make the information more available, more attractive, and to actually benefit from those things.
Right. I think My Future Super sounds better with an Australian accent than a British accent. But Helen. Oh, sorry, not Helen. Sorry, Tanya. Tanya, I couldn't see who was waiting. Sorry, Tanya.
That's okay. That's fine. I guess a couple of things. I mean, research-wise, we know that UK savers do want to better understand the impact of their funds. And I agree with Richard in terms of this has been a very complicated setting in the past. I think this is a real opportunity for pension companies to really lay out their credentials in a very simple way, because I think that people do want that line of sight. And I think it's right also that pension companies do. Somebody said that they felt that this was about investing in a world that was worth living in, and undoubtedly many pension funds have stepped up. But there's a lot to do. Of the 3 trillion that we know is invested in UK pension funds, when we look at this from a WWF perspective, and we look at the impact of some of that investment in settings like the Arctic, we know it would give savers real cause for concern. Pension funds as a group overall dominate company investments that are active in the Arctic. And those are the kind of things, if I held a pension, that I would want to know to be able to make the right choice moving forward.
Right. We have a couple of great questions, very similar, from Sophie Smith from Pensions Age and also from Alex Crombie from the Ethical Consumer magazine, who are basically saying, isn't the answer auto-enrollment? Shouldn't we just be auto-enrolling company employees into ethical pensions or sustainable pensions as their default option? Helen.
I mean, in a sense we do. So we automatically enroll people into a default fund. And the vast majority of people stay there. More than 98% of our members are in the default fund, and it's largely because they've been placed there through auto-enrolment. They haven't made a choice. So I think the key is to get the default fund responsible and to make sure that the default fund is responsible. And on that question about people needing to know about this stuff, auto-enrollment is still quite a new thing. We've now got 18 million people saving in a pension in this country, some of them quite new to it. Some of those account balances are quite small, but people are starting to get really interested. Many of our members tell us that they're really interested in this, that they've got a right to know how their money's invested. They want to know how their money's invested. A couple of things we might want to think about though. One is we've got to stop using all this jargon. It is completely baffling to people. We are confusing people with the way we talk about these things. And the second thing is we need a common language. We all use different words for the same things, and it is just completely confusing to the consumer. So I think there are some practical things that we could do to make communicating about these important issues easier.
Right. Well, I think that's sadly, very sadly, we are just about out of time right now. But it's been an amazing conversation. I see there's more questions coming in right now. So apologies for those for whom I couldn't get the questions to. But I think that the point that you make, Helen, is very good, because what we're talking about is something that most people instinctively agree with if they stop and think about it, but they've not stopped and thought about it in the past. The whole point about this campaign is to get people to think about what they're doing with their money. People often call sustainable investing impact investing, and that's kind of a misnomer, because all investing has an impact. The question is it a good impact or a bad impact, and do we think about that impact? And we haven't until now. There's obviously going to be quite a few industry changes that will need to happen for this to take place. There may be some governmental changes too, looking at you, Mark. There may be legal changes, or at least legal clarity needed. But above all else, what's probably needed is transparency and a sense of accountability, and essentially telling consumers that they can have empowerment, not just in terms of what they eat and how they drive or how they don't drive and the clothes they buy, but also where they put their money. So congratulations to all of you who have been supporting this campaign. It's certainly something we're going to be writing about a lot in the coming weeks and months at the Financial Times. I'm sure the other journalists on the call will also be picking up on it a lot. And as I say, I guess the key thing we're all looking for now, apart from lots more campaigning and lots more educational initiatives, will be when we finally see the film about pensions and sustainable pensions with Julia Roberts. So thank you all very much indeed for taking part, and best of luck.